invitations this Ramadan either. The irony is that fasting has been enforced much earlier than expected. I'd like to call on Caradene to speak now, please.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. Before I start, I just want to acknowledge that I'm speaking on and we're gathered on the stolen land of the Gundungurra people. Sovereignty was never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So I'd like to talk briefly today about white feminism. It's something I have quite a lot of experience with. Actually, I am a recovering white feminist. A number of years ago, I participated in some life-changing anti-racist work with a black Muslim woman called Layla Saad. Layla facilitated this work free of charge, and it was called Me and White Supremacy. This work involved deep self-inquiry in order to uncover unconscious biases that exist deep within the psyches of all of those who have been raised, socialised and conditioned within white supremacist cultures, like Australian culture. This work was confronting and challenging, but ultimately it was one of the most important things I've ever done. I never considered myself to be racist. I have black and brown-skinned friends. My son's great-grandmother was Malaysian. I have a university education, and I did Aboriginal studies. Many of my favourite musicians and artists are black. I actually resented the fact that Layla was suggesting that I could hold racist beliefs and operate from a place of white supremacy. I was determined to prove that I did not see colour, and determined to prove that I considered all people to be equal. And yet, after engaging in the self-inquiry that Layla facilitated, lo and behold, the racist beliefs started to surface. At first, I was horrified. I felt guilty and ashamed. But I quickly learned that black, brown, and Indigenous people didn't want me to feel ashamed. They didn't want to punish me or enact any kind of revenge. They just wanted me to show up. They just wanted me to listen to them. So I did. What I learned is that as a white woman living on stolen land and as a descendant of colonizers, I hold an enormous amount of privilege. I learned that what I needed to do was give up some of that privilege to make the lives of people of colour better. The very first privilege I needed to give up was the privilege of white silence, and that involved coming to terms with my white fragility. Why was it so hard not to be silent on issues of racism and white supremacy? What was I scared of? Offending someone? I very soon realised that if I ever wanted things to change, then white descendants of colonisers living on stolen land needed to be offended, and I needed to use my voice to offend them. Fast forward to October 2023, and I knew that the time had come for me to pay forward the work that Layla had gifted to me. From the outset, I knew that I could not be silent about Israel's continued brutal oppression of the Palestinian people and the occupation of their lands. I could not be silent and look away as a horrific slaughter of innocent Palestinian civilians, a huge proportion of them, women and children, escalated rapidly. I needed to advocate for Palestinian women, and yet I was surrounded by silent women. Women who were active and vocal about climate change, women who were active and vocal about Indigenous rights and have been campaigning for the Yes vote in Australia, all silent. And when I brought up Palestine with them, they were quick to tell me that it was too complicated and they didn't know enough to have a position or speak out. My thoughts were, what do you need to know other than that killing and maiming and displacing women, children and babies and destroying their families, homes, land and social infrastructure was wrong and needed to stop. I quickly saw that the internet, and particularly social media, was full of white women facilitating courses designed to heal women's trauma and empower women to be their best individual selves and to live their best individual lives, and that the vast majority of these women were silent about what was happening to Palestinian women and their families at the hands of the Israeli occupation forces. These white women were too fragile to speak, too fragile to draw attention to the crimes of yet another white supremacist settler colony. I came to realize that this is because the entity that is Israel is the same entity that is the USA, and it's the same entity that is Europe, and it's the same entity that is Australia. And this has become chillingly clear as after 5 months of genocide, our government has still taken no action to stop Israel massacring Palestinian people. And our politicians refer to Israel as Australia's friend. Seriously, with friends like that, who needs enemies? And this entity I speak of is the same entity that women who hold proximity to whiteness draw their privilege from and benefit from. As white women, we need to be doing the work of self-inquiry that reveals that the systems of colonial oppression that commit genocide in Palestine are the same systems of colonial oppression that are destroying our global ecology and creating climate change. They are the same systems of colonial oppression that displaced and oppressed First Nations people in Australia and other settler colonies like the USA. And as feminists, we need to deeply understand that they are the same systems of oppression that have historically oppressed women. Once we develop and embody this understanding, everything becomes much more clear and simple. We need to do the work to dismantle these systems of oppression. None of us are free until all of us are free. We need to give up the privilege of benefiting from these systems. Yes. The first step is to stop being silent and stop being fragile. We must speak up and out together. We must call in other women. We must raise our collective voices and say, enough, this must stop. Because the silence of white women enables the violence of white men. Our silence aids in the manufacturing of consent for genocide. If we are silent, we are complicit. We need to divest from white feminists that are silent about Palestine, because Israel's war on the people of Palestine is right at the intersection of all the most important global crises that affect all people on earth. We need to listen to and learn from Black, Brown and Indigenous women. We need to follow their lead and take directions from them. We need to allow them to take up more space as we take up less space, and we need to elevate their voices and their teachings. We need to pay Black, Brown and Indigenous women for their labour. We need to buy their books, we need to take their courses, and we need to put our learning into action. Solidarity is an action. We need to give our time to these actions and commit to them as our lifelong work. Otherwise, nothing will change. Otherwise, Palestine cannot ever be free. We need to divest from whiteness and everything that it represents. In ending, I want to recommend Layla Saad's book. It's titled Me and White Supremacy, the same as the work I did with her. It is such an essential tool and guide for those doing anti-racist work. I also recommend the Australian Lebanese author Ruby Hamad's book, White Tears, Brown Scars, How White Feminism Betrays Women of Colour. I also want to encourage you all, if you haven't already, to join our mailing list. Me and my colleagues at Mountains for Palestine, we're going to put together a list of resources for anti-racist work, so we'll send that out in the next group email. So ceasefire now, end the genocide, and free Palestine. Thanks everyone.